Thank you all very much for attending this meeting of the Overview Scrutiny Committee on the 23rd of April. Nice to see you all. We'll start off with apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence, please?
We have no apologies at the moment, thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on to confirmation of minutes. I'm assuming you've all read them. So are there anything you're unhappy about or need changing? Okay, thank you. Would somebody like to propose?
I will.
Somebody second? Thank you very much. Councillor West. There are a few things arising from the minutes which I'll talk to you about. So the Tavistock, Meadowlands and Tavistock, the dome was going to be cleaned, and that was done in March. And I have photos if you want to see them. There was also a couple of things we need to do. So we'll talk about this in the task and finish group, the working group section. So one of the things was the leisure working group will meet to talk about car parking fees. And also it would be good if the leisure working group could visit the leisure centres before the school holidays. And the final thing was a South West Water task and finish group need to get together and decide what our next step is going to be. So that was all in those minutes. Councillor Mann.
Sorry, there was one other thing that I thought was arising from that, which was to do with the building surveyors from the Devon Building Control Partnership. He offered to have further meetings with us if we wanted to find out how it had gone with the changeover in the new legislation. And I don't know if we want to schedule that at some point in the future, but it did seem to me that it sounded like he had said that it was the biggest change in building control in decades, and that they had people with 30 or 40 years in the profession leaving. So I do think it would be worth checking to see how that's gone and whether they've actually been able to license them, because they said that was the concern, wasn't it?
Can I suggest, Chair, that we ask the building control manager to do a written update, and then it can come back to the next committee, and then the committee can decide whether they feel they need to get building control back in, if that's okay.
That's okay, Councillor Mann?
That would be great.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor West?
Yeah, with regards to South West Water, we're actually talking about a working party, setting up a working party to work with them. So, you know, as a follow-up and considering what we've had in the news recently in terms of it, then I think it's important we do get them back in to raise some of those important points that have been made.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about that in the task and finish group section, if that's all right.
Yep, fine.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to declarations of interest. Does anybody have any disclosable pecuniary interests or registrable interests or non-registrable interests they would like to declare, please? So I don't see anybody has any. So we'll move on to items requiring urgent attention, which there are none. A public forum. We don't have anything raised by the public. So if we can move on to the waste and recycling services update. Councillor Daniel, would you like to join us? That's fine. We were moving on quickly. Do you want to introduce this item, or shall I ask? Yeah, take your time, Lynn. We've got all afternoon.
This is the Waste and Recycling Update Report. The three recommendations are that the Executive recognises the performance of the Waste and Recycling Service over the past 12 months. Secondly, that the presentation that is going to be provided from the contractors be representative on performance, that we note that, and also the work being...
What he stated, did he express?
One down, one to go.
Councillor Leach, can you go on mute, please?
It was constant. Did you know he was going out to all this?
Can't we mute him?
Thank you very much.
Okay, sorry. And that we recognise the work being undertaken to drive forward the continuous improvement of our service. So this report confirms that the recycling service is compliant with the Environment Act, namely that weekly food waste is collected and also weekly recycling of paper, card, plastic, steel, aluminium cans and glass. We in West Devon have been ahead on these requirements for a while, so we can be pleased with this. West Devon have a recycling rate of 53.9%. Our target, in line with Devon, is 65% by 2035. The service will aim to reach that target as soon as possible, so if we can reach sooner, then we will. 2019 saw a joint outsourced service contract, including South Hams. South Hams District Council exited the contract in 2023, leaving West Devon to negotiate a contract variation, which was successfully managed by our waste officers. This achievement is an achievement to be proud of, and I thank them for the hours of work that went into this and the improved waste performances across West Devon. West Devon, in partnership with other Devon districts, carries out regular waste analysis of the residual waste. So this gives us a picture of how much is in the black bags and how much of this could have been recycled. We will be having campaigns to encourage reduction in residual waste, and we've recently had a Metal Matters campaign, which I hope everyone's seen and received through the post, to encourage metal recycling. West Devon will be improving the delivery of our waste vehicles and utilising online tools and resources to ensure residents have the information they need for recycling, and plus that we have other planned campaigns to encourage recycling, reuse and also reduce waste in the first place. West Devon's made a bid for funding for a chewing gum removal machinery to clean up the streets, and we hope this to be successful. And I think our officer will be able to give us more information on how that works if you want to ask the question later. The contractor service has been consistently high results and is now stable following the areas around the contract variation. A review of the fleet's been carried out with 4 replacement vehicles for purchase this year, and a plan is in place for a comprehensive vehicle replacement scheme. Residual waste has decreased from 321 kilograms per household in 21-22 to 313 kilograms in 22-23. So our plan is to continue to reduce this. West Devon is already ahead of and will continue to ensure that waste is reduced as far as we can. The Devon-wide target is actually 400 kilograms by 2030, so it shows that we're actually quite a way ahead. That's something else we can be proud of. Councillors had a visit to the Energy from Waste plant in Plymouth recently, and it was shocking to actually see 4 days of South West Devon's waste for incineration, and it really demonstrated the need that we need to reduce waste everywhere. And there's also a visit to the biodigester plant in Holsworthy planned, which takes the food waste from West Devon as well as other councils locally. And officers will continue to work with the contractor to ensure we meet our KP indicators of no more than 80 missed collections in 100,000. Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes.
Good afternoon. I do have a couple of questions. The recycling rate of 53.9% with a target of 65, in my particular ward, there's some new estates that the recycling lorries don't actually go into the estates, and it's down to the residents to take their recycling bins to the end of the road. And some of the consensus is that some of them then can't be bothered and are just binning it into black bags, which sort of goes against, if we're being told that the recycling lorries can't go into the estates.
Accessibility.
They're saying it's due to accessibility.
Right. Okay, so that's
but at the same token, there'd be a fire engine or an ambulance could get access. So I suppose my question would be is, has the council considered, rather than the residents trying to put their recycling into small recycling bins, maybe purchase some larger ones where sort of a biffa style recycling bin is used, so the residents within those estates can do a more manageable job?
I think, particularly in small villages, we do have smaller vehicles specifically for the narrow lanes, so there may be a way that we could use those for the narrow areas on new estates as well, but that's something that our waste officer perhaps could answer. Yes, Dale?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. If you'd like to send me the details of that, I can certainly look into that for you. We do tend to stay clear of the communal collection points for recycling in particular, because it does cause a lot of issues with contamination and fly tipping. That said, if you want to send me the details of the estate that you're talking to, we can certainly look into it in more detail for you.
Yeah, certainly will do.
Thank you very much. I'm slightly confused. Do we have a presentation from FCC? Yes. Yeah, is that, when are we doing that? Are we doing that now? And then have questions on both? Yeah, is that all right?
Certainly have your presentation now. Thank you.
Yeah, if you want to do your presentation, then we'll ask questions on the whole thing, if that's all right. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, just to, if you can, before we do this one, sorry, just a little bit of background. As it referenced earlier, FCC in one guise or another have been carrying out the collections in West Devon since 1991. We currently operate your refuse and recycling collections. Recycling collections are on slightly different vehicles. I'm sure you've seen them. The Rome Equip, which is it's a bit like calling a vacuum a Hoover. Rome Equip is the manufacturer, and that is the name that has sort of stuck. So it is the curbside sort vehicle. And then the refuse is collected on what we would all call a dustbin lorry. So those are the recycling services. You've got a prescription garden waste service, and then we are also responsible for the street cleansing, street sweeping, toilet cleaning, and we operate the transfer station at Haydown on your behalf. Just to give you a bit of a scope of what we do. We've currently got just over 60 employees on the contract. We are fully employed with regards to drivers. We have about 6 vacancies at the moment on the loader workforce, which are being covered by agency. So we are fully manned, but they're not all full-time employees. What we tend to do is they will come to us through an agency for a period of time, and we use that as almost their probation. So it's almost standard practice within the industry. So we are fully manned, which is very encouraging, and it's not a position that we've been in a lot of the country, as is the industry, for quite some years. That does seem to be improving now. So that was just a very quick bit of background for FCC and what we do for you at present. So I'm going to do a Chris Whitty. Next slide, please. So as far as the missed bin numbers for the last year, our target is to achieve 80 missed bin collections per 100,000. We have done that, or we do that on most months, which we are within the parameters or the key performance indicators. There, obviously, as with any service of this type, there is the occasional times when we don't achieve those numbers. Notably, in January, the January figure is slightly distorted because it says that we failed. However, that was more of a recording issue. Hopefully you'll back me up on this stuff. It was more of a recording issue in that we had recorded some exemptions where we couldn't get into a road. but we'd recorded them incorrectly, we'd taken it on the chin, it's a failure for which we receive a deduction. And in October, we failed considerably, and that was predominantly due to some breakdowns of the fleet, and many of those vehicles, or some of those vehicles that are broken down, we are now looking to replace as part of the aforementioned fleet replacement programme. So we maintain the vehicles for you. They are due to stay on the contract for 9 years. Some of those vehicles that we are currently replacing are 10, 11 years old, so they are due for replacement. So we are currently going through that process at the moment. The majority of the remainder of the fleet are still within their lifetime and should, barring catastrophic failure, should last until the end of the current 9 years. Sorry, next slide. Sorry. Obviously, this is one of our services is to deliver the containers for you. So this is just to give you a feeling of the amounts of containers that we are delivering on a monthly basis. It's a full-time job for somebody. Obviously, the slightly taller, I don't particularly like the colour scheme, but the slightly taller pink column there is for the garden waste sacks, which, as you can see from that, is quite obviously very seasonal. It has just started to ramp up again. Something that I actually learned this morning. Those numbers don't correlate to actual subscriptions. They are partly subscriptions and partly residents asking for replacement sacks because they're damaged or something like that. But it's just to give you an indication of the amounts of deliveries that we do carry out each month. And it does, obviously it drops down in the winter where the garden drops away, but we do try and keep on top of those. We have an SLA to deliver them with a certain period, and again, please feel free, but we do almost exclusively achieve that SLA, and if we don't, it's discussed. As you can see here, or as you can't see here, this is the mist bins broken down by service, and as you can see there, the recycling service is the one that encounters the most misses. This is predominantly because, well, it's a weekly service and there are a lot more containers. Anything that is missed is counted as a miss. So if for any reason we don't empty one of the food waste caddies, it goes against a recycling miss. So again, it's not an unusual statistic to see a higher level of recycling misses on a weekly service. But again, it just, the chart doesn't really do it justice because they are reasonably low numbers. And it is just to really illustrate that it is the recycling service which we don't have more problems with, but they are more likely to be reported as misses. Bulky waste collections, obviously we carry out those on your behalf. This only takes place on 1 day a week. And again, it is a very fluctuating number, but it is a dedicated resource on that 1 day of the week. Other days of the week he will do clinical collections, that type of thing. But it is just to give you an indication of the amount of bulky collections we are carrying out on your behalf. We did, at a meeting this morning, discuss that we will start to try and give a little bit more detail on that, because if you look at October, 70 collections, that wasn't 70 items. That could have been up to, is it up to 5? Yeah, so each one of those could have been 5 separate items, large sort of household items. So what we will start doing is reporting back to you on how many items we are actually collecting, because that's a more useful metric for yourselves. We are currently undergoing a round review, which will look at the balance of the rounds and just the general balance of the work, because the rounds they have developed over the years, and when that happens, sometimes you have to sort of take a breath and say, right, let's actually look at this whole thing again. We will do that as a mixture of a computer-based program and also local knowledge. We have, again, this morning committed to come back to the waste team with some proposals for that by the end of May. It may be that our rounds are as optimum as they can be, but if by changing days on a couple of properties we can make them more efficient, then that will be our proposal. That won't be that will just be our proposal of what the potential benefit of that is. So that work is going on in the background. Obviously, we are still continuing to provide equipment to litter picking groups within the district, which again we will continue to do so. As part of the agreement for the contract to continue, which sounds a bit, there was a new vehicle that was to be purchased that came onto the contract at the end of February, and then became operational during March. So we are now fully up to our complement. Whilst that wasn't there, we did have a hired vehicle, so it wasn't there. So that is now fully operational. So you will see one brand new Rome-equipped vehicle, curbside collection vehicle, on the contract. And as we've mentioned earlier, we are now looking at the fleet replacement program, breaking down the vehicles into those that need to be replaced sooner, later, etc., just to try and make sure that we can smooth out the replacement program, to make it as equally beneficial for both parties. There are some vehicles that will last a lot longer. There are some vehicles that we may have to replace sooner. But as I say, we are currently looking to come back at the next quarterly meeting with a proposal on the replacement of those vehicles, most of which are currently about 2026 replacement. However, with other things that are going around the Environmental Act, etc., chassis will become more and more scarce as people have to order vehicles to replace, to collect food, etc. So you are in a very good position with that, but of course that may impact your ability to order new vehicles. So that's why we want to get ahead of the curve on that and then start looking at that now. I think that's it.
Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Well, we're going to move on to Mr. Molyneux, has got something to say before we move on to questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess we didn't do introductions, did we? So Dale Cropper is the waste specialist who works for Sarah Moody, whose responsibility from a West Devon perspective of managing the contract and the relationship. And Brian Ashby is, I don't know what your title is these days, Brian. Head of UK Collections, is that?
Head of Municipal and Collections and Street Scene for FCC.
Right, thank you, Brian. Dale, do you want to just go to the first slide and just talk through how we manage the contract and manage the performance with FCC, just to give members that overview? Because effectively we use that data, don't we? So do you want to just explain that?
Sure. So thanks, Steve. So that data comes from the Whitespace system, and that's analysed by one of our performance officers, Claire Butcher. We then take that data, sorry.
Stop there. Do you want to explain what white space system is to everybody?
Sure. Sorry, members. So Whitespace is the back office system that we use, which has basically all the address details, all the collections for all the properties, and it's what FCC and us, and agreed also in South Hams actually, what they use in cab. So when the crews are out collecting, that's what they'll be using to know which property, which collection is due at which property on which day. So they will use that, as Brian alluded to earlier, for logging any exceptions. So if the bins haven't been put out or they're contaminated, they will use all of that information. The crews capture that, and then that feeds back into the back office system, which we then look at. We then meet with FCC on a fortnightly basis to discuss performance, any miscollections, any issues with repeat misses or assisted misses. We also then have a monthly report which FCC provide to us with all of that information on, and we meet quarterly, which is what we've done today, to discuss the quarter performance of FCC as well. So officers very closely monitor this contract on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and work very closely with the FCC contract manager, Ian Yeoman, to make sure that the performance is where it should be. And as Mr. Ashby's alluded to earlier, by and large, as you can see from that table, the performance has been very strong over the last 12 months.
Okay, can we move on to questions, please? Councillor Calder?
When your vehicles have ended their useful life, are they going to be replaced with electric vehicles? And if so, have you got the infrastructure to cope with it?
Probably needs to be a joint, but
Okay, thank you, Councillor. With all of the fleet forward plans, we always look at opportunities to progress that, whether it's with a different vehicle or, of course, with electric vehicles. There are significant issues with infrastructure in West Devon in terms of how far the vehicles can travel before they need to recharge. There's also a significant cost attached to that. So the cost of a roam equip or collection vehicle is probably double the cost of a normal collection vehicle. And the cost of putting an infrastructure in to charge the vehicle tends to run into tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds. That said, we have had conversations with FCC to look at trialling an electric roam equip in the future to see how it handles with the geography of the district. And we are also looking at some of the smaller vehicles, so things that are used for things like toilet cleaning and locality vehicles, whether they can be moved to electric vans, because that's something that is probably a little bit more achievable in the short term as we look at long-term options. Anything you want to add to that, Brian?
yeah, all I would perhaps add to that is that I know that the roam equip do have an electric option. The point around the cost, we are literally just in the process of buying some electric vehicle RCVs, the standard refuse vehicles, and they're about 3 times the cost of a normal vehicle. So you could get a diesel vehicle for about 160,000, and we're currently about 460,000 for an electric vehicle. And to electrify the depot, if the electricity is available, because obviously that's the first point, that is costing roughly another £500,000. So they are very, very big ticket numbers, and you have to evaluate whether they can actually do the job, because particularly on an RCV, because the batteries have to operate all of the systems on it. They do have a range of about 100 miles in a day. So again, it wouldn't suit everywhere, and this is the problem that we're experiencing elsewhere. We can have a few vehicles, but the vast majority of the fleet will have to remain diesel or another as they come forward. So we do look at them, and certainly smaller vehicles should be feasible when they come up for replacement. But again, it is all dependent on the mileage. The mileage done each day. And operating an electric vehicle myself, range anxiety is a terrible thing.
Councillor Southcott.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. With the garden waste system that you currently operate, is there any plans to change that system from the bags to anything else? Because the bags don't seem to last that long. You know, they tend to get torn. Mainly, I found when they're being emptied, and they come back to us, they're damaged.
Thank you, Councillor. I guess that's really a conversation for the West Devon Waste Working Group to take back and have a look at whether they want to consider options. In South Hams, obviously, they use a bin, which is something that West Devon members have been reluctant to pursue in the past, but we are certainly open to looking at that and suggest maybe that Councillor Daniels takes up to Waste Working Group to discuss.
Fine, thank you.
Councillor Caspar.
Mr. Ashby's just made a good point to that, sorry to interrupt, that also the current fleet is not equipped to collect bins on a garden waste service. So if we did want to change our collection style, we'd have to potentially look at how we operate our fleet to make sure that we've got vehicles equipped to collect the garden waste, which again will probably have an additional cost.
Good afternoon. My question sort of tags on to Councillor Calder's question. With relating to moving vehicles on and then getting replacements, obviously you've spoken a lot about electric vehicles, but hydrogen seems to be where a lot of the motoring manufacturers are going down, even to a point I believe BMW are actually making a retrofit option to existing vehicles. So have we considered, or have you considered, taking hydrogen vehicles on rather than electric? Because a lot of the motoring manufacturers are telling us that electric car sales, for example, have slowed right down.
That's my previous answer. Owning an electric vehicle, I'm not surprised. But no, as a company, we are not a West Devon thing, but as a company, we are looking at all options. There are two different types of hydrogen vehicle that we think are going to move forward. There is electrified hydrogen, which is essentially, it is an electric vehicle which is operated or charged through a hydrogen process. Or there is actually combustible hydrogen, which it's a little bit like LPG. You put it in the vehicle burns it. Different manufacturers are taking different routes. So at the moment, Dennis Eagle, which is probably the main RCV provider in the country, have gone down the electric route, just a straight electric vehicle. We have just spent, my senior fleet engineer has just spent a week out in Germany with Mercedes and Fraunhofer, who are going down the hydrogen route. They are still quite a long way away from developing those vehicles to be able to be, a drop-in service. There are a couple of hydrogen vehicles in the country. There is one in, I think, Aberdeen and one in St Helens. They cost, again, just short of £500,000 each. And it solves part of the problem, but there is still an infrastructure issue because you've got to be able to get hydrogen deliveries and you've got to have hydrogen fueling systems in place. They are all things that will, I think, become a lot clearer over the next couple of years. And you do have the advantage that I don't think the RCV fleet, that is about 27, I think it's 2027. So you've still got a few years before you have to make those decisions. But as an FCC company, we are exploring all options, but obviously they won't all suit West Devon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bollidier.
And I would say as officers, so are we exploring those options? I mean, the figures that I've had for the hydrogen vehicle was more like £800,000, so massively expensive. However, there is a hydrogen plant being built in Langage, and we have put a bid in to government for South Hams to potentially buy a hydrogen vehicle and use that infrastructure that is going in place in Langage as part of a pilot to test on behalf of DEFRA a hydrogen vehicle in a really rural environment. So it's something that we're looking at, and I think the timing is just wrong. I know Exeter use electric vehicles and they've been struggling with them just in Exeter. So the key issues, and another example is electric road sweepers, the little mini road sweepers. So a diesel one costs about £90,000, an electric one costs about £240,000. So it would seem like a fairly straightforward, well, go to electric for something like that, but the cost, and to give you a scale of how much we put into our fleet forward plan, our replacement plan, West Devon puts about £500,000 in, and that's it per year. So if you think a mini road sweeper is half of that, then if you then go to an electric vehicle, which is getting on for more than a year's worth of our fleet replacement, it becomes very expensive very quickly. But as technology develops, I'm sure prices will come down. So,
Thank you. Councillor West?
Yeah, I'm quite interested in forward planning, always have been, and I'm very interested to see that with the housing estates increasing as they are in Tavistock, and I'm sure across West Devon, you talk about optimising routes and that, but I'd just like you to try to help me understand how you project forward in terms of potential increases and how you manage increasing staff or even extra vehicles. We're not just talking about replacement, potentially we're talking about increasing the size of the fleet because of the increasing housing. Any thoughts on that?
What we would normally do is we would get an idea from you on what you think your housing growth is likely to be. But as a standard, because an awful lot of the work will be done by a computer-led program, rightly or wrongly, we base it on an assumption of about 10% growth. So we will build a certain amount of capacity into the rounds, and then we will look at different points at which they are triggered over the length of the contract. So because of where we are at the moment, I think we've probably got enough capacity in our existing rounds with the reroute for what we are currently doing, and the 10%, because that is how it was planned. Anything more than that, then I think we would have to then start looking at additional resources. But they won't get built overnight. We will, as I say, we meet regularly, so we will be able to keep an eye on that. And obviously, the first port of call will be we will ask the guys to work overtime, and it's when that then becomes unsustainable or it's just too much for them, then we will start looking at bringing in additional resources.
So basically, you will obviously have some idea what new houses are being built and the sort of lead-in time on that. So you're very aware of that.
We would rely on the council to provide us with that information.
Okay.
But yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Mann?
Sorry. Yes, I just had a question around continuing to help litter groups with equipment and collection of waste sacks. How do they find that information, and where do they get in touch with you?
So if the groups want to contact myself or any of the waste colleagues, we can put them in touch with the right people. We're currently just setting up a group with Goldsworthy now, and I think we've also got Tidy Tavistock on board. But yeah, if they're happy to email me directly, I can sort that out with SUC Direct.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott?
Thank you. So I'm a bit of a data geek, so I just wanted to dig in a little bit more to the data. So I've heard the report about it being 57.9%, I think, recycled. Does the back office system give you different percentages for the different rounds? And if so, how many rounds are there, and roughly how much variation is there? Or does it only give you a West Devon-wide figure?
I can have a stab. No, the system doesn't give you the tonnages, and that's what it's based upon. So that from a collections perspective, and don't forget that won't be all of your recycling, will it? So from a collections perspective, that recycling rate is not ours because we only do the recycling part of it. So we can give you that and that would be based on obviously what we tip for the refuse and what we process through the recycling, and that's a great calculation. But it won't go any further than that. White space, the CMS system will allow you to look at, because we would record properties that don't recycle. So there is a facility where you can create hotspots. So you will have areas that just don't recycle, where you could then concentrate your messages. So white space would allow you to do that, but it wouldn't. That is all it would allow.
It won't work out the tonnages, but that would be great. It just seems to me if we're trying to up recycling, knowing where to target resources would be great. And then another very different question is looking at the graph that shows about the number of recycling boxes, etc., that you deliver. It was quite a lot, it seemed to me. I mean, it's roughly about 5,000 a year, I think, if you total it up. And there's not that many households in West Devon. 57,000 people, but not that many households. So again, do you have a sort of sense as to whether that's quite a high number compared to other councils, whether there's a way of reducing that? Because that's wastage in itself. I sort of would like to know where all those big plastic boxes are going.
Well, certainly we have another contract that does curbside sort. It's in Scotland, but and no, I would say they were indicative numbers. There is a certain amount of, we can try and influence that by making sure that our guys present them, empty them and then present them back at the property, stacked with the lids inside, etc. But they do tend to get damaged. They get wind blown, etc., blown into the road. I'm not saying that there's 5,000 bins, on the A30 or anything like that, but we can manage what we can. But genuinely, that is not an excessive amount, I don't think, for certainly our experience elsewhere.
I can just add to that. So one of the things that come up in our quarterly meeting with FCC this morning was how we can use some of our locality officers to understand if we're getting a large amount of requests from certain areas, for them to go and engage with housing associations and so forth to see if there's an issue, perhaps with storage. So there was an area this morning, I can't remember where it is off the top of my head, but they've actually agreed to build some kind of storage containers to put the boxes in, because they're getting it blown around in the wind quite a bit. So we are actively working with MLOs to try and resolve that as well, because it is high.
Yeah, please.
Just a couple of things. In answer to your first question, Councillor Elliott, Dale, can you just explain about the waste composition analysis? Because I'm sure that will float Councillor Elliott's boat first. And I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, so we had a waste composition analysis completed in 2022, as Mr. Molyneux says. And that is basically where people will go through and collect a sample of black bins from all of the different authorities across Devon, and then they essentially weigh what's in that bin to break it down into different material types. So for instance, we know that in West Devon, about 26 to 27% of what's in black bags is food waste, which is obviously very high and stuff that should be taken out. And as Councillor Daniels alluded to earlier, the reason for running the Metal Matters campaign that has just gone out recently was because about 3% of what's in the residual waste is steel, and steel and metal of that type can actually be reused forever. It never kind of perishes, so the last thing we want to be doing is kind of sending that to the incinerator. So we look at that data, and but what we're doing now is trying to do targeted campaigns to link into what we can see that's in the black bags that needs to come out. And on top of that, doing a bit of a kind of an education piece for residents, for them to help understand what they can and can't recycle, because sometimes you get an item, you're not quite sure whether it can be recycled or not. So we're doing some campaigns on that as well. But happy to share that composition analysis, Councillor Elliott, if you'd like to see it.
Yeah, Steve's quite right. You know how to show a girl a good time, don't you?
Indulge me.
Yes,
Sorry, Chairman. And the second point about the containers, different councils in Devon are all doing curbside recycling, but they all have different approaches. So in Teignbridge, for example, they don't provide lids. Now, we've taken the decision to provide lids because, of course, if you leave cardboard out and it gets wet, then it's pretty much worthless. So we provide lids, but there's a cost to providing lids. In East Devon, they charge residents for extra containers. Now, I'm not saying we should do that, but there's a cost to providing all of that. There's a cost of A, the materials, and then B, paying FCC to go, and as Brian says, a person permanently employed giving stuff out. So it's something, again, for the Waste Working Group to consider how we might reduce that cost without compromising, actually, we want people to recycle more.
Thank you very much. I think we could talk about recycling all day. So if we could finish off fairly soon. Councillor Southcott, you have a question?
Yeah, one, funnily enough, it relates just to what we've been talking about, the boxes and the lids. The lids don't survive very long. They're of very poor quality, quite brittle, easily damaged, and quite often when they come back from the curb, being emptied, they are cracked, etc. And when you're talking about the paper and cardboard waste, which you want to keep dry, they let the water in. You just cannot keep the water out of the boxes with those lids. So maybe the quality of the lid that you're using needs to be upgraded a bit, something a little bit less fragile, more ductile in nature.
I think part of the problem is the horizontal rain that West Devon gets.
It's not the rain, it's the quality of the lid.
Yeah, we can certainly look at that, and again, we'll pick that up with Waste Working Group, along with, we constantly look at all of the different materials that we use, so yeah, we can happily look at that, Councillor Southcott.
Okay, final question, Councillor West?
Just quickly, I'm assuming that when we talk about replacing the boxes, if the lid is cracked like Councillor Southcott said, we don't replace the whole thing, do we? Can we just replace lids? No, that's why I'm just worried that.
Okay, I think we're finished. Thank you very much for coming to talk to us. Really appreciate that. We have some recommendations. I just want to say I haven't had a single complaint from a resident for anything to do with waste and recycling for months, so I'm very happy about that. So thank you very much for your work. Really appreciate that. I think we have some recommendations.
Yes, we have. We've got 3 recommendations. They are that the Executive recognises the performance of the Waste and Recycling Service over the past 12 months, that the Executive recognises the presentation provided from the contractor's representative on performance, and that the Executive recognises the work being undertaken to drive forward continuous improvements of our service. All in favour?
Yeah. Raise your hand if you're in favour. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Nice to meet you. Thank you very much for joining us. We don't know whether it's Live West or Live West who are joining us, but I'm sure you can help us. Thank you.
I'll do the introductions then, shall I? I'd like to introduce Russell Baldwinson, and I've got his title here. He's the Executive Director of Development and Investment, and he's going to update us on Live West and their performance and things within West Devon. He's going to do a quick presentation, a slide presentation, which we've had a lot of questions in advance that he's got, so I hope this will cover them. If it doesn't, there will be a session at the end where you're happy to take questions. So feel free then, I'll leave you in his capable hands.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so it's Russell Baldwinson, Live West. As mentioned, I'm responsible for development and investment within the organisation. I don't know if I need to move that a little bit closer. Which basically, development speaks for itself. Investment is the forward investment of our programme in our homes. So it's effectively kitchens, bathrooms, boilers, windows, doors, external walls, roofs, all of the big component elements of the homes. So you kindly asked a few questions in advance. So what I'll try to do is I'll try and do a quick canter through, perhaps be no more than 10 minutes or so. And I'll do it like this. So basically, as an overall organisation, Live West owns just over 40,000 homes across its geography, and that's across Devon, Cornwall, Somerset and the west of England. And about 36,000 of those, I haven't put it on here, are rented homes, low-cost rented homes, the majority of which are social rent. Within West Devon Borough, we own and manage 1,855 homes, and all bar about 60 of those are low-cost rented homes. The 60 being shared ownership, which form part of our 1855. I think it's probably worth pointing out, it's fairly obvious stuff, but we're a very customer-focused organisation, and I'm going to show you some metrics in a minute which just demonstrate that. And in terms of the expenditure over the last 12 months, and this is broadly in line with our new business plan going forward, we spend about £100 million a year on our existing homes. So of that, 70 million is our forward programme, so that's the things I mentioned previously, windows, doors, bathrooms, kitchens, and so on. We spend about 9.5 million when we go into homes when they become void, so that's when a tenancy ends. And in terms of the volume of those, it's somewhere between 120 to 140 a month. So I haven't done the maths, but you can work that out for yourselves. And in terms of, and this is more of a recent phenomenon, we're spending about 20 million or just over 20 million on responding to customer demand at the moment. So that is where a customer directly contacts us and says, I have something wrong with my home. Can you please come and address it on our behalf? So that's probably twice as much as where it has been long-term historically, and it's significantly above what we've budgeted. So at the moment, we're playing catch-up in respect of demand. And I think that's a sector-wide issue. It's not specific to us. And then in addition to that, we spend about 200 million a year on new homes. So we are one of the largest developing housing associations nationally. I think last year we were 11th nationally, which as an association, which I think we're the 20th largest nationally again, we're doing a little bit more than our proportional size. So I had a couple of questions around our timeframes for kitchens and bathrooms, and we do, it's about 70 kitchens a year and 50 bathrooms a year we work through. And in terms of timeframes, it's 20 years for a kitchen and 30 years for a bathroom. And in terms of decent homes, because decent homes is the standard to which we adhere to as a registered social landlord, the decent home standard is 30 years for kitchens and 40 years for bathrooms. So I'm not saying that's great. I think the decent home standard isn't very good, but that's the standard that we work to. In terms of us as an organisation, so I said we were customer-facing and customer-orientated. As a sector, the affordable housing sector is regulated by the Regulator for Social Housing. The Regulator for Social Housing has historically looked at two things, governance and viability. And as of this calendar year, the Regulator for Social Housing is now looking at the consumer standard for housing associations. And what that basically means is there are a number of key measures, and they're called tenant satisfaction measures, by which every affordable housing provider, whether it's a local authority or a registered housing provider being a housing association, will be judged. And effectively, each organisation will be awarded a consumer rating. So Live West haven't had that rating yet. We have a governance rating and a viability rating of G1, V1. Most housing associations are G1, most housing associations are V2, so we have a stronger viability than most. By way of a guide, I think that the Regulator for Social Housing is expecting most local authorities who are stock owning to probably be a 3 or a 4, housing associations to be rated a 2, and in some instances a 3, and very few will receive a C1 rating. So we're very focused on making sure that we're providing good services to our customers. You fall into one of 3 ratings in respect of TSMs, which is either lower, median, or upper quartile. And I haven't put the figures in there, but just to give you a sense of where we are, we're hitting upper quartile on all bar 2. So I think it's just really important that in any conversations that you have, you can see that the focus is very much on customer satisfaction within the organisation. And the 2 where we're not where we want to be, they're quite difficult ones. So the first one is the most recent repair. The big issue that we have is around time. Actually, we set ourselves a 28-day target for responding and addressing customer requests for repairs. And that's something that we're struggling to hit at the moment just because of the volume of repairs that we're receiving. And in respect of communal areas, that could be quite a challenging one as well, because they're very often service chargeable, and there's a relationship between how much you're paying and the service you receive. And actually finding a strong performance in that area is quite challenging. But notwithstanding that, we still want to be upper quartile in both of those 2 areas, and it's not something that we're accepting. But it just gives you a sense of where we are as an organisation. In terms of disposals, so there were a number of questions around disposals. I'm not going to read what's on the screen verbatim, but effectively we have an approach to disposals whereby we have a disposal at the point of void, or we have a disposal where we strategically identify a home as being appropriate for an action which could be a disposal. And effectively, we put some criteria in place around those homes, and it generally means either the home is quite difficult to let, and it does happen in some instances. We might have 2 or 3 tenant refusals when we have a property which is to let. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. Where it requires a huge amount of future investment, and what we do is we look at what it costs us to put in terms of the financial contribution into a new home, and we will look at what the financial contribution is in terms of effectively reinstating a home at void. And we often find that the cost of reinstatement can exceed the capital contribution that we put into a new home, which seems quite strange, but a new home effectively through planning is subsidised through the planning permission itself, which means that you effectively are paying a discounted price for it. Or if you're directly delivering a home which you're funding, then it's part funded internally, part funded by debt finance, and part funded by the model itself, and then part funded by Homes England grant. And it's the bit that you put in, which is the debt funded element, which can often be exceeded by the cost of reinstating a home. Or there's an issue regarding the social position of the home, or the environmental issue, which we think, or the environmental credentials of a home, which we think aren't capable of being addressed. So it just sets out why we might consider a home for disposal at void. And strategically, again, there are a number of criteria as well, and it's stuff around ASB complaints, lettability. It might be that we have something which requires a huge amount of investment again, or a statewide investment, which doesn't make a huge amount of sense when you look at it compared to its social value as well. So we do have criteria for disposals, and what I've got here is I've got the numbers coming up as well to give you a sense. So you can see here that our disposals have increased since 1920, being the first financial year where we've got a huge amount of data post-merger. And you can see that we've gone from roughly 3 per annum through to 15. So it has been increasing, with last year being the highest number. A lot of those were because we had voids on properties in West Devon. And you can obviously see the capital net contribution which the organisation received. So they are the exact figures. And then you can see what we've delivered as new homes as well in each of those years by volume and by investment in delivering those homes. So you can see that the investment exceeds the income, but notwithstanding that, we do recognise that disposals are contentious. They're quite often not going to be replaced on a one-to-one basis in the location, and we do speak to your officers and notify them when we do have a disposal. And we've got a number of things that we can talk about around that as well, which we have in place, or we can put in place if you would like. And then I was also asked a question around right to buys. So you can see that we had 6 right to buys and right to acquires, and that was between the financial years 19-24, so relatively low in number as well. So that's across our entire housing stock within West Devon. It was a real whistle-stop in terms of a number of the questions. There may be other things that that members would like to ask, and obviously very happy to take questions. Would you like me to stop sharing now? So, do I need to remain on the call, or? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. I think we'll have some questions.
Yeah, of course.
Councillor Mann?
Just starting with the disposals policy, obviously you mentioned the criteria. It didn't seem that the criteria included any criteria around looking at the effect on that local community or the location of that home. And you identified the issue that I'm curious about, which is if you are then disposing of something, say in West Devon, where are you then spending that money? Are you spending it back in West Devon, and where are you delivering those? Because I know a lot of the new homes that are being listed on there have been delivered in Tavistock and Horbridge, as far as I know, because we've got a lot of development. But actually, some of the places that have been sold have been in South Zeal, which have no, there's no relationship there for the person that we would want to maybe rehouse. That's a really big distance. So where else and how are you going to, and when do you consider how we can replace that in those villages? So
being clear and honest, we do spend the money in West Devon, and we've had the same conversation with South Hams as well. So when we identify homes for disposal, that creates effectively a budget of income for that area, and we make sure that we re-spend that money within the administrative area. In terms of the point that you raised around rural locations and village locations and smaller towns, unfortunately, we can't determine where homes are going to be delivered. And it's something that we have to work proactively with yourselves on as a local authority to identify schemes and then look to replace them. And that's something which I know that the team are doing now, and we will work actively with them on. But historically, what we've found as an organisation is that schemes haven't come forward in rural locations. And effectively, we find that homes require a significant amount of investment to get them to either carbon net zero, one ion, but in the interim period, what we call C by 28, which is our reaching SAP level C by 2028, which is 2 years in advance of the legislative requirement for 2030. So we recognise that it is an issue, and it's something that we would like to work with you on. It's something that we've very much highlighted with South Hams as well, as saying that we recognise that in rural locations, when we sell homes, it creates a void in that location in terms of no new homes are being delivered. But I think it's something which is a joint responsibility. It isn't our sole responsibility. And if the sites are promoted and we're happy to work with you to promote them, then we're very happy to use our development budget and our Homes England funding to actually support the delivery of those schemes in rural locations.
Councillor Johnson.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. What checks do you make to ensure that disposals meet the Section 157 local connection rule?
I'll have to come back to you on that one because I'm not the expert in terms of answering that question. From our perspective, we will make sure that any requirements which are laid down through planning or other statute are met. So we don't have a policy whereby we circumnavigate any restrictions which are imposed on a property. But I'll have to come back to you on that one, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, did you have a follow-up, Councillor Mann?
I guess my question is around some of those disposals. Is there another solution which is not to dispose of some of the higher cost properties in these rural locations instead of having to replace with new? I mean, obviously new is a lot less expensive, but if we don't think that there is something coming forward, has that ever been considered and used as a factor in making a decision?
So we've had conversations with your officers about whether or not there's an opportunity to actually utilise local authority funding to retain the home as an affordable home, and we've said that's something we're very happy to explore. From our own perspective, if we're looking at a home which requires significant investment and we could provide 2 affordable homes, given the level of demand within the region and the administrative area, our approach would be to look to new. One of the things that, looking at our business and looking at the asset management element of our business, and I don't really like the term asset management, but looking at how we manage our homes and invest in our homes, one of the things that we have to look at is that the homes are not a perpetual commodity. They don't last indefinitely, so they do have a lifespan. And one of the real issues that we have is that our rents are fixed. We don't have the ability to charge a market rent because of the nature of our organisation, and neither do we want to. But if we require a huge amount of investment, we don't have any mechanism to recover that investment. And obviously, one of the things that we have to do is we have to spend our money very wisely to try and maximise the delivery of affordable housing and the investment in the homes that we've got. So effectively, new development is funded through debt, and that's debt which is leveraged against existing homes. So the homes effectively are used as collateral and charged, and our existing homes have to be funded through our rents. So we have to be very careful in terms of how we spend our money on the stock that we have to make sure that we provide really good quality homes to our customers. And then as an organisation, we've got to make sure that we comply with various areas of legislation, decent homes, HHSRS in terms of the key tests to make sure the homes are indeed decent, hitting C by 30, and we're finding, and for us it's 28, but we're finding that the costs of doing that are quite often several £1,000s, can be upwards of 10, and then we have to make sure that anything that we're doing enables us to reach carbon net zero by 2050, which is something which will probably require whole home solutions in respect of older homes, whereas newer homes the solutions are far less costly, for want of a better term, because effectively a whole house solution could cost as much as replacing the home in itself. So there are some real challenges that we're having to grapple with as an organisation, and that's off of what effectively is a fixed rent.
Hi. I believe you have local letting plans which are annually reviewed. Is that still the case, and are you happy with their effectiveness?
Yeah, we do, and yes, they are reviewed annually. So, and we do look at the effectiveness of those plans. We have local lettings policies as well, which we put in for specific estates to try and create a situation where we're letting to the, not necessarily the whole, or not necessarily the same group in respect of estate, to try and create something which is more diverse and appropriate. But yes, we do. So we can certainly, if you want to see some more information on that, I can certainly provide it. That wouldn't be an issue.
Thank you.
No problem.
Councillor West.
Just a quick follow-up, and then there's a question I need to ask. I mean, when we were discussing this prior to the meeting, we were looking at the idea that in some respects you're getting gentrification through the back door in some of these villages because of this impact of this. Now, obviously you've got a business to run, you've got certain standards to meet. So would you say the issue is with what you're doing, or with what the current planning and house building regulations and all that sort of thing's about?
All grief. That's a naughty question. So I come from a development background, and I don't mind saying this. I've worked for commercial developers for 15 years, and one of the big problems for me lies with the volume of opportunities which come through the planning system, which then present themselves as housing opportunities. So one of the things that we generally find is that we are a larger organisation, so the perception would be that we will do the larger sites most of the time. We generally do sites from about 10 homes or thereabouts, and 10 can be easily rounded down to 8 or 9, up to our largest scheme, which is over 800 homes. So we're quite diverse in terms of the scale of projects that we deliver. One of the things that we've been trying to actively speak to other local authorities about is, how do we work proactively with you to deliver what would otherwise be commercial development sites which were market-led as all affordable housing? And that could be a 10 or a 15 or a 20 unit scheme, as long as the mix is appropriate, which means it predominantly needs to be a few 1 beds, 2 and 3 beds, and an appropriate number of 4 beds or larger, depending on the families which are requiring housing in that location. And I think for me, if those schemes are delivered as affordable housing and they're not delivered as market-led sites by SMEs, then that's generally a success, because most local village locations have a relatively low level of affordable housing and low supply of affordable housing and very high demand, because most families who live in that, or their young families who are growing up, are on relatively low incomes, and it's a real issue across the entire Southwest Peninsula, more so in Devon and more so in Cornwall than perhaps the periphery to Bristol. So I think for me, it's about increasing the supply of land. Land is expensive, and it's expensive because of supply. And generally speaking, and I've been guilty of this, so I'm not proud of it, but when I worked for commercial developers, the approach was to try and drive down the provision of affordable housing, because it makes a stronger return for your shareholders. I'm now on the other side of the fence, and I'm very much supportive and want the delivery of affordable housing, because it's the right thing given the demographic of our society in this area and the level of demand that exists. We make no bones about it. When we let an affordable home, we have a high number of instances where we get over 100 applicants for the home, which is absolutely insane. And if we can increase affordable housing supply and in areas of high demand, which includes rural locations, I think that's really important. And I'm not talking about the way a rural settlement is defined, which is a settlement of less than 3,000 inhabitants. It needs to be in the smaller towns and larger villages where they need a diverse population to be sustainable.
That's great, thank you. Get your perspective on that, and it's interesting seeing it from either side, isn't it, from that point of view. I mean, as you know, we've got our, what's the phrase for it, Mark? Our Devon...
West Devon housing offer.
That's it, yeah. I mean, your perceptions of that going forward, because obviously that would bring in a lot of these little parcels of land which we could develop. How do you feel that initiative could work well for us in West
I think that's
Devon?
really positive. I'll be honest with you, I think anything which increases the supply of opportunities which could be delivered as affordable housing is a positive. And I think the fact that you're doing that should be commended, because not many local authorities are.
Well done, Mark and Mandy. Then I'll get to my question, if I can find it on my screen. Where's it gone? There we are. With regard to right to buy, it's an interesting one. And I know there's different, well, I assume there's different regulations about it. Because my question is, when people sort of buy their properties and that, are they able to rent it out for Airbnb or for holiday lets, as private lets, straight away, or is there a time scale around that? What's the regulations around that?
Being candid with you, I'm not sure what the position is once we've sold the home to them, but it would very much depend on their own circumstances, I would imagine. If they're buying the home to occupy, then clearly not. But you know, we recognise that it's quite hard to police and govern where you might have households taking a decision to let their home out during busy summer months as Airbnbs, and we find that it's something that we probably have to police more in Cornwall than any other area. But I think that there's a risk of that. I'm not going to pretend that there isn't, whether it's regulated or not. If someone wants to do it, they're going to do it, aren't they?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So if somebody has the buy to let, they could buy it. There's no regulations around that. So they could buy it 1 minute, offer you for half the market price, and then 6 months later they can sell it at full price.
Yeah, I think there's some restrictions around sale.
Yes,
in terms of time.
There is a covenant on the property. However, the challenge is policing that and recognising these properties when they're advertised on Airbnb and being on the site looking and saying that's an ex-council house. That's got a covenant.
Or that's a current.
Yes.
I think it's I think actually policing it is very challenging.
Thank you. Interesting area.
Thank you. Councillor Southcott.
Thank you, Chair. You've recently been awarded some decarbonisation
some DESNIS funding, yeah.
Yeah, funding. One of the things I see missing on a lot of social housing is solar panels and batteries, which will give the occupants a lower electrical cost, considering today majority of people use electric showers, etc. Everything's electric in the house these days. So are you using that money to retrofit houses?
Okay, yeah. So no, we are. So most of our approach to homes is a fabric first approach to homes because it's more resilient. But where a home is got a reasonable energy performance, we will put photovoltaic on the roof, predominantly because photovoltaic works really well in our part of the world because it's a light-based way of gaining energy. We do not put batteries in homes, though. We don't put batteries in homes for a number of reasons. The first one is that it's relatively new technology and we would be responsible for the batteries, and then there's the fire safety associated with the batteries, and most homes that it's being put into, the position where they would go would be in the roof, and it's being able to access, service, maintain and ensure that they're safe. And that's something that we haven't basically got to a position of having an identified solution for yet. It's something that we're looking at in terms of new homes and whether or not we can actually create a fireproof area to put those batteries in, because unlike you or I, if we took a decision to do something in our own home, we're not regulated by legislation in terms of how we would onward maintain and look after that component. Whereas as a social housing provider, we're regulated and we need to make sure that we're not in any way putting that customer or their property at risk. So we don't have a battery approach as an organisation at the moment, but we very much have an approach to putting photovoltaic on roofs.
find that disappointing because I've recently gone down that route myself, and it's reduced my electric bill by over 50% by going a 5 kilowatt system and a battery storage system.
I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I think that what we've also got is we've got a situation whereby, you know, we've put a significant sum of money aside in our business plan to take our homes to carbon net zero. There's a disconnect in social housing between, and this is a personal view, this isn't a Live West view, so there's a disconnect between the cost in use to the customer and the rent that the customer pays and the investment that goes into a home. So someone living in a home which is 50 years old, which could be SAP rating G, which is about as low as any affordable housing provider might have a home, would be paying potentially the same rent as someone who moves into a brand new home which could have an energy efficiency rating of A. And they would have very different heating bills and costs to maintain and run those homes. And in many respects, there are lots of disconnects at the moment, but as an organisation, we need to try and make sure that we create as best parity as we possibly can and invest in homes appropriately so that we're improving everyone's position to a minimum of C. And at the moment, unfortunately, battery technology and where we are as an organisation, it's just not it's not yet in our environmental strategy for our homes.
I will beg to differ on that matter, but we'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, and I'm not disagreeing with anything you say. I do agree with you, but I'm just basically saying that we're not in a position where we're able to do that at the moment.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. Do you know how many houses in West Devon have got PV panels on their roofs?
Not off the top of my head, but on most new homes, if they are orientated appropriately, then there is a strong likelihood that they will do. I can certainly find out how many homes we have if that's something that you'd like to know.
Councillor Caspar.
I would just like to ask, what sort of numbers are we talking in terms of a waiting list at the moment with yourselves for somebody that does want a property?
I don't know that. That's something that Izzy might well be able to answer.
It's around 600, I think, but we can get you the latest data. Around 600 in West Devon in housing needs. So that's bands A to D on the housing rate, on Devon Home Choice, with a further 500 probably in band E, which is classed as no housing need, but people will obviously feel that they do have a housing need. It just doesn't sit within the reasonable preference criteria. We can get you, I can give Kathy a link to the Devon Home Choice data that can go out in the minutes.
Councillor West.
Just thinking about, and to some extent, it might help explain some of the void issues, because we hear a number of people saying, well, houses are being left void 5, 6, 7 months, and it's a ridiculous time in terms of turnaround. But when we looked at it, we thought, well, what is the usual notice tenants can give? You know, what is the regular? And also, if there is a deceased, somebody dies within the property and that sort of thing, for my own interest, if somebody dies, fair enough, the house is void from that point, I'm assuming. But if a family member dies, say a husband and wife, one of them dies and the other person goes into a home or something like that, or they have to downsize, what's the sort of regulations around that? Do they have to move? Because I'm aware of, we don't call it bedroom tax, do we? But, you know, whereby if they're on benefits because they won't get the rent to pay for 3 bedrooms, etc. Sorry, long-winded way of asking.
This isn't my area of expertise, but where the latter one would very much depend on the individual and whether or not they were going into, you know, if they were going to some form of care facility, if that was them to become their home, then yes, effectively that would create a void if they relinquish the home. So the customer would need to relinquish the home. So, you know, we have situations where obviously customers do die while we have a tenancy. They have a tenancy with us, and obviously that will become a void shortly thereafter. And it's an awful situations, some customers are very proactive about it, and they know that that's going to happen, and they will sign the paperwork in advance. It's not something that we ask them to do. And others, it will be dealt with, unfortunately, after they've passed away. So I think it very much depends on individual circumstances. And in terms of the time frame, again, I'm not part of the housing team, so I couldn't tell you what the time frames are in terms of a notice period, but I can certainly ask the question and drop a line back to Izzy with the PV point and confirm what the time frames are for you, no problem.
Man.
On the back of that, and also on the data about the satisfaction from customers and your customer focus, how quickly are void properties being made ready for new occupants? And are you actually able to turn them around as quickly as they could be turned around in order to get new people in?
Okay, so there isn't really any average. We target 2 to 4 weeks, but you can obviously see the amount of money that we're having to spend on some of these homes. It can take significantly longer than that. So, and it very much depends on what knowledge we have on the homes. So some of our homes we're not able to gain access to. So if a customer refuses us access, won't allow us to undertake stock condition surveys, they don't have gas in the home, then there's no necessity to go into them manually. So we do have instances where we're not able to get into homes. We have refusals for kitchens, bathrooms. Obviously, we know where we've got refusals, and we go in expecting there to be a longer void period because they require a significant level of investment. We know that we've had instances where it has gone on for 5 or 6 months, which isn't where we want to be. As an organisation, we're targeting reducing our void costs by 50%, and we think that we can actually do that. So we're on a programme of trying to turn our homes around a lot quicker and focusing on the works that are required in those homes. And we know as well from previous data prior to merger when we were DCH, that we can get it lower again still. So we're on a journey where we're trying to take unnecessary cost out of the business, because it's a twofold effect. Firstly, it means that a customer can't move into a home and they're waiting unnecessarily, something that we don't want. And secondly, but least importantly, it costs us as an organisation money which we could be spending on improving homes or investing in new homes. So it is a targeted area at the moment. But if there's no issues, it can be as little as a couple of weeks. If there are some general refurb works or a new kitchen required, you're probably talking 4. But again, we do have some significant outliers, which is something that we don't need and don't want and are trying to eradicate. But there are normally special circumstances. And we have really, really strange situations. We will have hoarders in homes, and they leave the home and they leave everything in the home. So we do have some real, quite obscure circumstances which we actually have to deal with on occasions.
Yes, Laban?
Sorry, it's just as a question on the data that you had earlier, which was around customer satisfaction, which I'm just curious. There were no numbers there, and you didn't really cite where that satisfaction survey was coming from, how it's generated, or who it is that's asked, and how you verify who it is that's answered. And I also noticed that you didn't have any complaints information, and those are the 2 figures that I'd be really interested in knowing a little bit more about.
Yeah, so sure. So in terms of the approach is what effectively is an approach which has been determined, which we're working to. In terms of the survey information, effectively, it's a mix of telephone and email responses. In terms of the validation, we're following a process which all associations are now following, but we can share with you what the methodology is if that's helpful. I particularly didn't put the figures in there just purely because they're internal figures. A lot of the figures or the position that we're at are all on our webpage. And what we've done in terms of our webpage is we've shown what our target is against the figure. So I'm quite happy to share the presentation. If you look at each of the areas, you'll be able to see where we're in Q1, but we're actually setting ourselves targets which are well beyond the existing targets. And some of the targets are quite challenging, and some of the targets, in my opinion, aren't great. So if you look at satisfaction with complaints, as an organisation, we are Q1 and we're about 10, 12 points above what effectively is the entry point to Q1, but it's still a really low figure, it's sub 50%. And so the sector doesn't have a great score, and we're targeting ourselves with a 65% satisfaction position. I think the figure's about 48, we're targeting 68, and I think that the sector average is around 36. It's not good. Most of the others are quite high and are well into Q1. So I didn't put them on there just purely because it then becomes a debate around where we are. I just wanted to give you a sense of how we were performing as an organisation. But on the Live West webpage, it sets out all of the customer and all of the home figures, and you can see where we're trying to improve in terms of where we are, where we've gone backwards, where we've improved, where we've remained relatively consistent with last year. So it's all very transparent. I can find out whether I can share all of the quartiles with you. I don't know whether or not it's something which is widely available, but I can check that, and if I'm able to, I'll just share what the latest report is, and you can see where we are. Yeah, I'm very, if I'm able to, I'm very happy to.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Caspar?
I've just got one last question then. On your website, you show that you've got careers and vacancies, and you've also got a very good page that lets people know about some apprentices that have done well and are still with the organisation. But I see that there is no vacancies for apprenticeships at present. Is it something that you do in batches, or as and when somebody qualifies and then moves forward?
No, we tend to do it in clusters or cohorts, just purely because most apprentices we want to take on a journey as a cohort. So effectively, they're all progressing in a similar way. So we did apprenticeships into trades, and that was a big focus for last year. And part of that was actually recruiting women into trades, and we had quite a successful apprenticeship across a number of different trades. So yeah, it is effectively done as cohorts and groups at any one time.
And do you have, just to tally on from that then, do you have a minimum age for your apprenticeships?
No.
So they could potentially start from 16 if they were to leave college or school? Because I know that some companies, they want them to be at a minimum of 18 because they're having to use a power tool.
Yeah, so it very much depends on what they're doing. So if they are going to be field-based, then they're obviously going to need to be 18. So if they're going into people's homes, or if they're working in a trade, they will need to be 18. If they're working in the office, they can be younger, because obviously from a risk assessed position, it's lower. But interestingly, we don't have an upper age either. So we've recruited a number of apprentices who are probably more reflective of the demographic of age in this room, including myself. So we don't have an upper age in respect of apprentices. So if you want to do a career change and you want to get into something which is very different from what you're doing at the moment, then that's something that we actively promote as well.
Okay, so if you're actively promoting it, it begs the question, why is it not on your website?
Because we recruit in cohorts at any one time. So we will do. So if we are doing apprentices around office space, we will recruit into finance, development, sales at any one time. If we're doing a trades recruitment, we'll recruit into trades at any one time.
In a group.
Yeah, in a group.
Thank you.
Mr. Molyneux?
Thank you, Chair. I'm torn here between, I absolutely understand your problems, but going back to the disposals thing, sort of three strands. So the first is quite an easy one. So you've got a target to get everything to EPCC by 2028. So in terms of, you've got that plan that says, well, these properties are not going to make it, or they're going to cost too much. So have we got that level of detail shared with us through to 2028, especially in terms of looking at future planning requirements? That's the first part of the question. So you can answer that first if you want.
Yeah, so we've identified the number of homes which obviously require investment to get to that. And then what we've done is we've made an assumption that X number of homes will be sold each year. We don't know where and when those homes will arise from our stock. So there's an overall assumption that last year we sold 110 homes. next year, or this current year, we'll probably sell about 160, 170. We were seeking to sell more than 110. So what will happen is we will sell broadly that number of homes, and they will not achieve or not be required to achieve SAP level C. So we know where all the homes are that effectively need to achieve C, but we don't know when a home is going to become void, because effectively what we find increasingly difficult, we talk about strategic voids, but in practice facilitating a strategic void is really quite difficult, and it's very time consuming. So we've got 3 regeneration schemes, and when I say regeneration, I mean effectively redeveloping a block of homes which are no longer fit for purpose. So we've got 1 in Plymouth, 1 in South Hams, and 1 in Penzance. And the time taken to actually find suitable alternative accommodation for each of the residents in each of those buildings, some of them have taken nearly 2 years. So trying to generate a strategic void is actually not something which is easily achievable. So it's more a reactive position to as and when voids arise. And invariably, it's about 23% of our homes are at D or below in terms of those that require investment. We know that 120 to 1,400, 120 to 140, I'm crudely timing it by 10, homes come available and as a void each year. So about 23% of those homes are almost certainly going to be at D or below, but we don't know where they're going to occur. So we look at each of the homes. We know that as and when we sell a home, effectively, we're targeting some of the worst performing homes effectively within the stock. And then obviously if we're developing homes, we're re-providing with a home which is much newer, with much better energy performance and cost in use for the resident that goes into the home. Admittedly, the point around, I accept that we don't provide them in the same place, but they are obviously somewhere within the administrative area. So it's unhelpful in the sense that they're not just down the road, but they are within the same council administrative area.
That's really helpful, because one of my questions was going to be, so basically you evict people because they're home, but you don't, is what you say.
We don't evict anyone.
That's great, that was fine. The second part then, going back to decarbonisation and the funding available, is, I don't know the figures, I'm sure Jane does, but I'm sure it's something like, it uses something like, to build a new home, construct a new home, uses 5 times the amount of carbon as it does to decarbonise an existing property. And yet this is based on the fact of profit. And is there not, and we talked about the decarbonisation grant, is there not more funding that you can access to actually, you know, if it's going to cost £30,000, as opposed to you could use that £30,000 and then you're leveraging loads of other funding in to build a new home, but actually you've got that one home in South Zeal that actually is really valuable to that small community. In terms of, is there not ways of exploring actually getting additional funding in to do that rather than just dispose of it in those really rural communities?
Yeah, so effectively the way the DESNES funds works is that you identify the home, the works that you're going to do to the home, and then you apply for the funding. Unfortunately, it's not a great system in terms of the funding that you then receive is then available in the public domain, which basically means that when you appoint contractors, it's quite expensive because they obviously know what funding you've got and they try to obviously take advantage for themselves. And they're all in the same boat. They all know what funding you've got and they all roughly bid at a similar level. So actually going for funding isn't always the best solution, and actually looking at the way that you can take the home from a SAP rating E or D or whatever it might be to a C, or quite often we achieve a B, and quite often we achieve a midpoint B on the homes that we're doing works on, because by the time we've done insulation, light bulbs, PV on the roof, some form of insulation or whatever it might be, we generally find that actually funding is not always the best course of action. So because the works can be delivered outside of a funding framework, and the transparency in terms of the funding arrangements in there, and you can procure it better. So funding isn't always the panacea that it's set out to be, unfortunately, and it's something that we've found, and we know certainly of 3 organisations, all working in the southwest, who've actually given their funding back, because when they've actually set about procuring the works, it hasn't aligned with their expectations. One of them's quite large as well. I'm not going to tell you their size because you'll work out who it is, but they are a very large housing association by scale. So it's quite a challenging forum to operate in, and our approach has been, let's target fabric first with all of our homes, because you're embedding the resilience into the fabric of the home, and invariably you don't replace the fabric of a home. So that can mean a whole home solution. It can mean roofs, windows, and walls with an EWI, an external wall insulating system. So it's very much about the most appropriate system for the home. And if you go very much down the PAS route, which is the accredited route for assessing a home so that it qualifies for DESNES funding, you're sort of projecting yourself on a trajectory to follow a rigid process, which then requires almost a rigid form of works, which then attributes quite a high cost, and it's not always the best solution. And it sounds a bit smoke and mirror-y, but it very much is not all it's set out to be.
I thank you for your answer, and I realise it's really, really complicated, much more complicated than my simple question. Thank you.
Yeah, apologies. I don't think I necessarily answered it in a simple way.
Thank you. Councillor Mann?
Just following on from that, it would be really valuable for me to actually see 2 examples of what you're talking about from a perspective of this house we decided to sell because, and this house we decided to retrofit because, if that was possible. Just because what I'm having trouble following is, from what you've just said, we're turning away funding because it's too expensive, but it's too expensive to retrofit them. So I'm sort of stuck in a place trying to understand how you can say, well, we're not going to take the funding, so we're going to sell the house because it's too expensive because the contractors are charging us too much. But then that's, so I need to actually understand the figures.
Well, the DESNES funding doesn't normally apply to individual homes. It would normally apply to an estate or a cluster of homes where you have a generic house type. And what I'm saying is, actually, you don't always need to get the DESNES funding. You can actually come up with a solution for them anyway, which you can do without actually attracting funding. So it's very much on a statewide basis. It's not about individual properties or street properties. So what you'd need to do is, and to be honest with you, it's not something that we've done, is you would need to look at where you've effectively identified a large number of homes for an intervention. You've decided not to do the intervention and then you've sold them, and that's not something that we invariably do. So if we've got a large cluster of homes, we will find a solution for them. A lot of the properties are normally a small cluster of homes where we just sell. It's normally a group of 1, 2, 3 or 4, or it might be an individual street property. So the majority of the homes that I sign off for sale, not necessarily in West Devon, will be an older Victorian home or a fisherman's cottage or something which is probably over 100 years old, which has got issues around thermal efficiency, requires a significant amount of investment, and actually it doesn't provide great affordable accommodation to the resident. We appreciate it might be the only affordable home in that location, or it might be a limited number, but it's not great affordable home. It's not a great affordable home because of the cost in use for the customer. So the DESNES funding is statewide. So we've had a number of estates that we've looked at where we've actually gone down the funding route and we've ended up putting significantly more money into them because we've signed up for the funding and we've had to go through the process. I don't mind sharing some of that information with you. I can get my technical director to go through it with you. But I think we can't show you a scenario where we've said, actually, this is what we were going to do. Actually, we're going to sell them instead because it's not the approach that we adopt.
Are there any other final questions? Councillor West?
Yeah, I'm just interested. I know in Horrobridge you took some sheltered accommodation and you took the site and actually developed about 4 or 5 houses on the site. Is that something you're considering doing more and more regularly? Because some of these properties may well have a relatively large amount of land with them, which potentially allow you to do that. So although you lose that property, you then can develop something there. How often is that happening, as in the Harbour Bridge case, more often, more widely?
It's going to be very site specific. So, a good example would be the scheme we've got in Plymouth and the scheme we've got in the South Hams. Both of those, both of the accommodation had reasons why we felt that they were no longer appropriate as affordable housing. So the Parker's Way one in South Hams, part of it was subterranean, it was cold, it attracted damp and mould. This was prior to our Abishak, so that we'd taken the decision to, not because we were being clever, but we just could see that there was a problem manifesting itself with those homes. And we've come up with what we think is a much better design, and because it is a significant cluster of homes, it's appropriate to redevelop it. It just very much depends on the individual circumstances. The one in Plymouth, again, it's 3-bedroom masonettes. It's not great accommodation, and we're delivering a mix of 2-bedroom flats and 2- and 3-bedroom houses to I think it's one unit more. So, in many respects, it just very much depends on the circumstances. If something is sat on a large area of land and it's sort of reached or getting close to the end of its life or its appropriateness for affordable housing, yes, we would definitely look at it. But invariably, what we find is that isn't what happens. A lot of the accommodation in the southwest, which is no longer great, tends to be quite dense, so it tends to be 3- or 4-story blocks, it tends to be apartments, it tends to be masonettes, larger accommodation arranged in a format that probably isn't reflective of our geography. So when you invariably look at it, you're looking at the communal wider space and seeing whether you can create a different property form on that, which is what we did with the Plymouth scheme. So I think it just very much depends on what the accommodation is, what the demand is. Does it lend itself to redevelopment or not? And I think if it does, we invariably will tackle it because we're sort of very development focused in terms of making sure that disposal isn't our first option, it's the last option because it's not appropriate for investment in our eyes. You don't have to agree with that, but that's the view that we've taken. Or it's not appropriate for redevelopment, so we've looked at it as a disposal in that instance. And obviously the approach is that we can then invest that money in either new or existing homes.
It's reassuring to hear that you will consider all options.
But yeah, no, we do.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Saxby.
Okay, so this is to do on a separate piece. I know we all want to leave soon, so I'll keep it brief. But did you say people in A to D banding, there's 600 people in West Devon waiting for homes?
Yes, I haven't looked at the figures in the last few weeks, but it's usually around that number, A to D, yeah.
How long does that waiting list take? How long would it take for those people to find a home on average?
That's very difficult because it will depend on where they're looking for accommodation. So if they're looking in a very rural area, it won't even matter if they're a high band, if those properties don't come up. And we've got areas of West Devon that in all the time Devon Home Choice has been running, there's never been a vacancy there because people have lived there all that time. So it will very much depend on their housing need and the band in which that they're in, and the availability of the properties in the areas that they wish to live in. But I can talk to you about that separately.
Yeah, okay, so this is why there's a housing issue in Devon. Okay, so what's Live West doing to contribute to the housing stock that we have?
So as I said, I think we're at the moment we're the 11th largest developer of affordable housing nationally, and the 7th largest developer of social rent nationally. So we're contributing more than anyone else in the southwest. We've got a number of constraints on us as an organisation, unfortunately, as have most associations now. So,
so sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
So you contribute funding to the developers to build the housing, or you have your own development arm that builds the housing?
We do both. So
Okay.
we buy Section 106 from commercial developers. We enter into contract with commercial developers and we pay them to build homes for us.
And those are the affordable homes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, so the developers choose not to build more affordable homes because it means less profit or less income for the shareholders. So how are you as Live West, so you provide for vulnerable people, how are you holding your ground against developers who are trying to maximise shareholder profit?
That's not our role, that's your role as a local authority.
Okay, so how can I do that? Or how can we, what's on that, how do we do that? Is that when it comes to planning?
Yeah, it's very much about planning policy. And unfortunately, the way that legislation works nationally, if a developer is able to show that the scheme as requested and as presented, and when I say requested, their ask of the local authority in terms of this is what we want as a form of development and your policies which then contribute to that. If the scheme is unviable, then the go-to area, and this is wrong in my view, I'm going to make that very clear because I'm on your side here, is the affordable housing. So SIL is ring fenced. So you have, if you imagine you have a concentric circle, SIL sits in the middle of that concentric circle, and that is ring fenced. Section 106 requirements are defined by policy and are a necessity, so they're delivered in relation to a planning permission. And then sitting outside of that circle is affordable housing. So it's the go-to area, unfortunately. So a good example will be the Tors Tavistock, Vistry, are the commercial developer. They took it through planning. They promoted the site. They got an affordable housing percentage of 17.2%. They were very proud of that. And they then obviously had a strong commercial margin as a return. They came to us and said, would you be interested in joint venturing on the project? We said we would, but we want to increase the provision of affordable housing on the site because we're an affordable housing provider. We have grant funding to do that. So we've utilised our own internal funding through debt funding and grant funding through Homes England to take it from what effectively is Section 106 delivered at 17.2 to 30%. So you get a higher provision of affordable housing. If the planning system was set up differently, you'd have got policy at day one, which is 30%. So this is the age-old problem which local authorities are grappling with, and unfortunately the way the system is set up, if viability is able to be demonstrated, then viability will win the day, and I don't agree with it for what it's worth.
Okay, so in planning, and when the application goes forward in planning, a change. So it's on us. It's our responsibility as the local authority. Nothing will change that. Then what should be the priority should be that the viability of. No, I think it's 10% at the moment of social housing, affordable housing on application. So we should prioritise that.
Yeah, so there's
as the lead measure.
Okay, so there's two things that you can do. You can obviously defend your position around viability on the larger sites, which would increase affordable housing provision on that area if you're successful. I think that's quite challenging, if truth be told, yeah. and I think that's going to be really difficult. I think a better approach is to identify sites which you think could be delivered, but not as affordable housing, and work with affordable housing providers who can then utilise grant. The problem is if you capture affordable housing through Section 106, then it suppresses the land value and you can't utilise grant. Whereas if you deliver sites in the traditional sense, as in they are allocated for housing, and the assumption is that you will deliver a policy level of affordable housing on it, if you are working with an affordable housing provider on those sites, then there's every opportunity you will deliver 100% affordable housing, as opposed to just policy levels of affordable housing. And that's what you're looking to do with your housing offer, isn't it? Yeah. So I think that's exactly the right thing to do, which is why I think it's commendable, and I think it's a really positive intervention. It's how do you move from sort of the 10, 15 affordable homes to the 30 or 40? So, a really good example is we're delivering two sites actually of scale, which are all affordable housing, which are on site. So there's one in Exeter, and there's three in Exeter, but two are finished, and there's one in Penzance. Sorry, I had to think. And they are, one's 100 and one is 89 homes, and they're 100% affordable housing. They've been progressed through planning by us on the basis that the landowner gets not all of the land value they've got if a Barrett or a Persimmon have bought it, but they get a reasonable chunk of that. You know, it's more than 50, but it's less than 100, so you can work that out for yourself. And we're delivering that with our own internal funding and grant funding as all affordable housing. Now, I think that's a really positive intervention in those locations, and that's how you get the volume sites coming forward. House builders generally target 100 homes plus. When the market gets really buoyant, they will go at smaller sites because they want outlets, and outlets drive profit, because the more homes they're selling and the more outlets they've got, the more shareholder value they're generating. So it's about how do you work collaboratively, not just with us, but with other housing associations, to actually deliver affordable housing where they would otherwise be delivered as open market-led sites. And it's generally, I think, you know, how do you target those 20 to perhaps 70 or 80 unit sites and try and stop them being delivered by SMEs and get housing associations to deliver them and use a grant to promote the delivery of affordable housing. That would be my view, but that's not my role. That's just my view.
Thank you. That's given me so much clarity. I really appreciate that.
And if you've got any questions, any of you, I'll be honest with you, development's my area of expertise. I'm very happy to you know, Izzy's got my email. If you want to channel them through Izzy, I'll happily respond and answer as best I can on any development-related matter.
Thank you. I think we have one last question from Councillor Mann.
Well, actually, that's just raised an issue for me. I'd really like to understand exactly the setup that you've just discussed, in particular around how it gets allocated as open market, but then becomes 100% affordable. We're working on a Tavistock neighbourhood plan at the moment, and I'm just really curious about how you avoid actually just establishing the principle of development on that site that you allocate, and that also disappears from the affordable housing, you know, because what you've just described sounds great, but it also sounds like just a way to backdoor market housing into a site. So I'm just, if we could, from either, it doesn't need to be from you necessarily, because I know it's not particularly yours, but if we can get that from the affordable housing team as well, to actually really understand how these sites are going to work that we're going out to get, and how you prevent it from sort of just rolling over into a regular open market situation.
Yeah, that would be great. I think there's enough questions for now. Thank you for taking so many questions and answering them for us.
It's very happy to, no problem.
Really appreciate that, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Councillor Renders, is there anything you want to say?
No, sorry, I was just discussing viability of what she had suggested there, but thank you very much. No.
That would be great if we could do that. Thank you for your time. Councillor Viney, would you like to join us?
No, she was happy there. That's good.
Did she? I hope. Yeah, okay. If you want to take a quick break, that's fine. It's a bit of a long session, isn't it? Tired looking faces. Okay, let's move on to item 8 on the agenda, key performance indicators. Would you like to introduce this, Councillor Edmonds?
Thank you, Chair. The first part of this report is a review of KPI performance for the period April 23 to March 24, a full year's report. The second part of the report sets out proposals for a revised suite of KPIs for the current year. The performance on a page shows that overall, the Council's performance across a wide range of frontline service areas is at or above expected performance levels, which is a credit to our officers who continue to operate in a climate of budget constraint. Looking at the areas at or above target, of note are the council tax and business rates collection rates at 98.37 and 97.79 respectively. These are key income streams for the council, and the residents of West Devon are to be congratulated on this achievement during such a challenging time financially. I must also thank the Revenues team for their excellent work in achieving such a good performance. Another area of good performance is revenues and benefits calls answered in 8 minutes. That's page 46 of your agenda papers. So in August 23, 34% of calls were answered in 8 minutes. In March 24, this has increased to 79%, a significant improvement, and during the busiest month of the year for that team. So there are just 5 areas where performance is marginally below target, and the narrative against each of the 5 areas explains the reasons why, and Mr. Hawke and I will be happy to expand on these areas if required by members, or indeed any aspect of KPI performance set out in the report. The second half of this report sets out details of the proposed changes to some of the KPIs for the current year. The aim of the changes set out in Appendix B is to provide members with additional data in some cases or additional narrative to clarify performance. And finally, Chair, performance updates will be provided to this committee at least 3 times during the year ended 31st of March 2025.
Thank you very much. Are you happy to take questions and comments? Are there any, please? Anne?
Yeah, I just have a question around the new performance indicators that were put forward. I don't remember seeing us, as councillors, provided with a sort of list to choose from or having had a discussion about where those came from. So I'm just wondering who decided on the new indicators.
I seem to remember last year, Mr. Hawke, at some point when we invited members there was a good discussion, and I think we took that away and built some of those changes into the proposed amendments here. Would that be correct?
I think that's fair to say, Councillor Edmonds, yes, that it very much, we've listened over the last 12 months since the new administration have come in, and as a result of that, we refined the KPIs. I think what we don't want to do is come up with a completely new suite of KPIs, because how do we compare performance to previous years? So we've really listened, and where measures haven't made sense, we've got rid of them. So temporary events notices, for example, is what does that tell members? Because we're always performing at 100%. So what's the point? But actually, what we have found is that through Audit and Governance Committee, there was a discussion around our performance in terms of food premises inspections and how are we doing against that. So we've taken that and we've informed our KPIs based on discussions. So we've listened in a range of committees and as a result come up with a proposed suite of KPIs for the year ahead. I think it's also fair to say that it was a strong focus for the peer review, and we've also taken into consideration the offlog or emerging offlog data. So we've looked at a range of sources to come up with some KPIs, and it's not going to be an exhaustive list. Obviously, as officers, we are reviewing performance on a regular basis through a range of boards, senior leadership team, performance boards. But this is just a suite of measures that we think members would be interested in.
Okay, I just was asking because I did have a question on a particular one that came up at DML last week, which was this one on the percentage of major applications determined within 13 weeks. So that says that in March 2024, 100% have been determined within 13 weeks. And I get a list, obviously, at DML of all the ones that are not been determined. Also, all the ones that have an agreed EOT. And there's quite a few on there that don't have an agreed EOT. And we also had one that went to appeal because it wasn't determined within 13 weeks. And what I noticed about this KPI is that it only is dividing the number of applications determined, which means that you've missed the one that has actually gone to the planning inspectorate because it isn't determined, it's actually been appealed because it was outside of that period. So that to me looks like a useless KPI if it allows us to not see the fact that we missed the 13-week period, but also we have now got an appeal with the planning inspectorate on a major application that is not in our KPIs.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. I'm not an expert on planning, I'll be honest. I don't know, Steve, if you are. I mean, we can certainly take that away. They are a proposed suite of KPIs at the moment, so we could certainly take that away. The KPI we've reported on is a national KPI, which enables us to compare with other councils, our performance. But we can take that feedback into consideration and take that back to Mr. Powell for review.
Sorry, do you mind if I just add to that? So I think the other one is the percentage non-major applications determined within 8 weeks. It's quite a common conversation for me to have with a resident to say they put in a planning application, a non-major one, and 3 or 4, 5 months later it still hasn't been determined. So it'll be useful if that KPI could kind of surface those issues. But
And I think it probably does. I mean, without the KPI report becoming a review of every planning application that we determine or otherwise. But certainly the enhanced reporting will give a bit of a breakdown. And certainly I know that you've raised a specific point through Councillor Edmonds that I've got a response from planning on that I can cover with you outside the meeting. But we're not aware of any issues in that instance.
Thank you. Councillor West?
Yeah, it just partly builds on what Councillor Mann was talking about. So I'm assuming that these key performance indicators, and I think you basically said this nearly in your answer to it, Councillor Mann, is we do sort of benchmark against other councils or standards, agreed standards across the thought. But I know on one we've had, which I hope we've taken out now, whereby you're only dealing with 1 or 2 things, or it's a small number, then obviously percentages can get skewed quite badly. Have we looked at that and made this better from that point of view?
We have, yes. So I think the Ombudsman complaints is a good example, where we get so few Ombudsman complaints that we can look like we're performing brilliantly, or we can look like we're performing really badly, based on 1 or 2 decisions. So we're proposing to get rid of that one, but actually bring forward a suite of measures around complaints that sets out, and the off-log measure is number of complaints per 10,000 of the population. So let's look at that. So that will be complaints that come into the council at stage 1 and 2 of our internal process, which actually we feel to you as members will provide a better demonstration of how our services are performing, rather than just saying 1 Ombudsman complaint upheld. What's that telling you?
Thank you, Dan.
Councillor Elliott?
So yeah, this builds very much on the point that Ursula was making, but is a more sort of generic point. So the problem with a lot of these KPIs is that you're using averages as a single measure rather than looking at any sort of range or what percentage are over a certain number of days. So some of them are absolutely fine, and some of them really do not make sense to just give an average, because you're only able to average the things that have been completed. So you don't know about, and this is exactly the same point, but more generic, you don't know about a new housing benefit claim that might still be in the system and maybe 40 days rather than within the average. Now that may not feel like a problem at an operational level, and I really respect the fact that there are people dealing with the operational data who might say, well, actually the average is fine because we've got a very narrow range, and so the average is a real measure. But I did offer to have an offline meeting about this to discuss it and so that I understood it better and could be more confident, but also could help in some way. And I do think, I haven't been taken up on that at all. I was sort of told that there's no point in killing things with data, but, as a councillor, I do want to understand how this data works and not just be given averages, because it does lead to the sorts of problems that Councillor Mann has. So I don't want to be overly aggressive about this, but I think it would be appropriate to just add a little bit more information about things like ranges rather than averages and how many things are in the system.
Thank you. The chair just said, carry on. I understand what you're saying, and take, for example, you mentioned housing benefit. The same thing applies to telephone calls, for example. In terms of an average, we answer calls in an average of 5 minutes. Now, we will answer probably 80% of the calls in 2 minutes. We'll answer 5 of the calls, probably wait 25 minutes, just because they all ring up at exactly the same time on the same day. And I understand what you're asking for is more information to get some context. And I think we can look at that in terms of...
We can, Steve. I mean, we've already talked about improving the narratives, so the explanations. So where there are real outlying points, so if somebody's waiting for 45 minutes, then let's look at that and perhaps include that in the narrative, rather than introducing new measures and additional measures. But we can certainly look at including those sorts of points in the narratives, I think is fair to say.
I think for me it's that, what is this suite of KPIs trying to give members? And what it's trying to say is overall the council is doing okay. And you've got to look at it in that level. If there's a specific that you say, well, actually, do you know what, we're not happy with that, and it may be, you talk about the planning example, that this committee says, do you know what, that's not good enough, we've got concerns. But you've got to, so if you think about this, we've got the council plan now that's in place, and one of the things that will be coming forward next year to overview and scrutiny will be a review against the council priorities. Where is the lead member and the council up to in delivering what it said it was going to do? So that's at the very strategic level. Then at the next level, you've got these KPIs, and then operationally, we have a load more data for revs and bends for planning. And I thought planning did a much more detailed review of performance figures on a quarterly basis. Does that not happen?
Yeah, I mean, this is coming out of the fact that we get the list of those. So it's not that the data isn't there, it's just that makes that KPI really not reflective of anything interesting. If it's if it's not reflected in that KPI, then I'm not sure why I'm looking at it, because we don't have that many major applications, and if the one that's gone to appeal doesn't show up because we don't show undetermined appealed. Do you see what I mean? Like, that's the failure. It's not a reflective of a good KPI, that particular one. But I do have another question, which is more around what you're saying. Sometimes there are some of these where I thought, actually, what I really want is a bit more of the surrounding information. So like online uptake of the processes started online versus through the contact center. I was like, well, I'd like actually to have a breakdown. What is actually started online versus the contact center? Do we get more, for instance, discretionary housing payments through the contact center versus other types of forms online? Are there certain things that are just not as well delivered through the online form? So like, rather than looking at it as just an overarching whole, and maybe that does happen somewhere else, but obviously on the overview and scrutiny, my question is, can we look at that kind of thing a little bit more in a little more detail? Because it's not very helpful I guess if I look at one that's just measuring online uptake versus contact center, all I'm measuring is how well we're doing at getting people to go online. But actually, if I want to get people to go online, if I'm missing the fact that it's always discretionary housing payments that don't get done online, then I've got no, I've missed the main point of that data. So it seems to me sometimes these data points are so top level that there's impossible for me to take any lesson from them.
So, and don't shoot me, Neil. I think what we need to do is probably start producing this report a bit more in advance of the agenda to give the opportunity to say, because we can't get every officer who's responsible for every KPI here at this meeting. But if we publish it early enough, and we say this is the information we're presenting, then I don't know how, but members can then say, do you know what, we really would like to understand that KPI a bit more, and we can bring the person who's responsible for that service along and have a bit more of an in-depth discussion on that KPI, what's made up, what's not in there, where like you say, where are the extremes, whether it's good or bad performance, why is that, what's not happening, but to do it now is quite difficult. But if we prepared and we're a bit more organised, and I'm wondering whether there's some sort of pre-meet or something we could go through it and then bring back the detail.
We could look at it, Steve. I mean, it's difficult because what we've done at the moment is programmed KPI updates to this committee so that we can take the most available up-to-date data, which means we go to the wire. So this report was published a day late because we wanted to give you the data as at the end of March, and we needed to capture that in-house. So, but we can certainly look at that. Yeah, I think it's a good idea. We can look at the timing of some of these processes. And
the other option then for the committee is whether we say, on the basis of this, at the next meeting, we would like a more detailed discussion on X or Y, and then we come back as an action, as an outcome of this discussion.
Yeah.
It's up to you, Chair.
I think also we have to think about our working relationship with the CDO leadership team, which I think is really good, and also the cost of creating the KPIs, and it's not our job to get involved in operational issues. So I think I feel that we have high levels of trust, and it's certainly improved year on year since I've been a councillor. So it's finding the balance, but I certainly think it would be a good idea to examine anything we're particularly concerned about. Councillor Viney?
Thanks. I would really appreciate Jane having a look at things as she suggested. It's a huge asset to have someone like her on the council, and it would be really great for someone like me, who is not strong in this area, to have someone like Jane to be able to translate that for me and feed it back to me. So I would really like to hope that we could please give her a look behind the scenes.
And Councillor Mann?
I guess the suggestion that I was really making was that it would be, if we're going to agree, because this looks to me that we're agreeing what the KPIs are going forward for the whole of next year, and that's what concerned me, is that there's a couple of them that just didn't seem to be KPIs that I'm not going to get that much information from. So if that's the point of this particular report, I would like a chance to reply to that and to ask those questions and say, could we make this more relevant to us as a group so that we understand it in a way that it reports back something that we could actually really be proud of? Because I don't know whether I don't know that tells me anything that I can comment on in some instances. If you have one major application that gets determined every month and it's always going to be under an agreed extension of time, then there's no point in reporting that. There are just certain ones where I just really felt like, gosh, I don't know that this is actually a useful KPI at all. And I don't want to say that I would agree to this for the whole next year. So I'd like a chance before we go into agreeing for the whole next year to get those questions answered. And that could be totally offline, and then we just bring it back, or we agree it via some other method. I don't know how you do that.
Councillor Elliott?
So just to say, I'm really happy to help, and I really do not want to get into the weeds and the operational detail, but they can be very misleading, some of these statistics, and it's well known that statistics can bamboozle people and hide all sorts of really important human issues. And so I just want to suggest, a couple of minor changes that will just make it more understandable for everybody. And just to really back up what Ursula's saying, that I really don't want to agree these now for the next year. But it doesn't mean that I don't think the council's doing a fantastic job, but it's just making sure that if things started to fall away, we need to be able to see that and it not be hidden in an average, which is an average of things that have been completed. It doesn't actually tell you about unfinished business, as it were.
Councillor West?
Yes, I think we just put forward the proposal that perhaps we set up a task and finish group with Jane leading that to work with us, just to review the suite of KPIs, not in committee or whatever, and then we can bring those back at some point for discussion for that. That would be my proposal.
Good. Okay, Councillor Edmonds.
Can I propose that we've got a system in place for this kind of discussion, and that's through the advisory group. So with Mr. Hawke's agreement, if we try and put together an advisory group meeting, a resources advisory group meeting, and invite Jane to that meeting, then members who are interested in this subject, and particularly members of the advisory group, resources advisory group, will all have the opportunity to be involved in that discussion. But I think Steve is right. I think we need to keep in mind the objective of these figures, this report. It's not intended to be an operational point. That's what we pay these guys for. So, I don't think we need to go into too much detail, but the KPI should enable members to raise questions where appropriate. Councillor's Mann question is absolutely relevant. We know the data is available. You've seen it in planning. So I think Mr. Hawke will probably be happy to look at that and build that point into what we're proposing here. Whether we should put, too much detail in at this level, I'm not sure, because the idea of this, that it enables members to raise questions, to question the performance where they feel there are concerns. And I accept there has to be enough data to be able to raise that question, but without going too far, because senior officers of this council are reviewing this on a monthly basis. And really we have to put our trust in them to identify any adverse trends and take the appropriate action. I don't think it's for members to start making those sorts of decisions, but we rely on members to flag that out, officers to flag that to us if there are any concerns. So I think it's just striking the right balance between what we report, the level of detail. It's got to be sufficient for members to be aware of performance. But if there are any concerns, this is the opportunity to raise those questions and for officers to provide the answers.
I think I'm hearing that this committee would like to have something like a task and finish group to work on some specific ones. Yeah, but advisory groups. Yeah,
it can be dealt within an advisory group. In fairness, that is the responsibility of the advisory group, which is already formed, and I would have thought that is the purpose of an advisory group.
I think you would, but I think the committee are disagreeing. I could be wrong, and I don't know quite what to do next. Councillor Viney?
So at an advisory group, say Jane was to attend, Councillor Elliott was to attend, how is she going to have enough information in advance to be able to make good calls in the short space of time of a single advisory group meeting?
So I think it's within this committee's gift to say we want a task and finish group. In terms of the level of, I think the task and finish group would need to say, these are the KPIs we want to look at as to whether they reflect performance. I would cast members back to 2.5 hours ago when FCC presented a whole pile of data and then Dale explained what we do to manage that contract, and it appears as two smiley faces on these KPIs, and that just shows the level of detail going back to that FCC thing. So that is going on for pretty much all of these KPIs. You know, you look at Rebs and Ben's call performance, and I get a weekly update as to what the call performance was, because I want to make sure that we are not slacking on what is important to me as my director, as my service. So that stuff is going on all the time, but it's absolutely within this committee's want and gift to say we want a task and finish group. We just need to think about what it is it's going to do.
Is it appropriate then to say who would like to be involved with that? Because if we can get a group, then it shows that we have enough interest. Is that logical? So anybody would like to volunteer to be part of that group?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, Chris. There is that resources group there. The discussions have been around it and everything else like that. But whether this is just that little step more in terms of a group just to look at it, maybe for reassurance and say Jane's experience, what she's got to look at it, and just to come back and reflect on that. And the best forum for that may be a task and finish group. But within that, I would then say that it would be good if that could come back to the resources group to discuss it in that wider forum potentially. That would be a way forward. And I also think, in terms of the data and that, it would be good if there is a flag up. Say, so we saw the 1 month on the curbside didn't make it, 253 or whatever. And there is an exact example whereby the devil's in the detail, and it's a case of, right, well, that was there, and we need to know why that was at that point, in case it is that we need to put more resource in or something like that. So that might be a better use in terms of the details, rather than average. If you average those out over the whole year, oh, it's not too bad. But the specific instances. So I think I'd be happy to go on the task and finish group and follow in Jane's footsteps, but I'm very aware that, as Chris said, we do have mechanisms to look at it as well, so we need to take account of that as well. So I think before, and I don't know what Chris feels about this, but whether there's a need for us to get together in the task and finish group, look at it, but before we come back to committee, we actually have a conversation with the Resource Hub advisory group to see their take on it as a way forward, perhaps to move it forward.
Mr. Molyneux suggested we have a recommendation and a proposal and a seconder and vote on it. So would anybody like to make a recommendation?
I thought we had a recommendation, which was for a task and finish group. So I will second that recommendation.
So can we vote on this, whether we would like to make a task and finish group, please, with a show of hands? Yes, I think I'm supposed to say that's clearly carried, aren't I?
Yeah.
So can we get volunteers now? So who would like to volunteer for that group? You're making a note. That's fine, okay, so we'll get that organised with the terms of reference and everything after the meeting. Thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Edmonds.
Perfectly fine. These meetings are for.
So in terms of the recommendations from the report then, we are not agreeing to the revised suite of KPI performance indicators. Is that correct? As it agrees to set up. Right. Is that everybody happy with that? So in terms of this, we're voting now on effectively that one, notes the key performance indicators for And then 2 needs to say notes the revised suite of KPI performance. And then 3 agrees to set up a task and finish group to review those. Yeah? That's what we're saying. Are we all happy with that?
Yeah, are we happy with that? Show of hands? You are? Good. This is complicated for an O&S meeting, isn't it?
It is 2.5 hours in, yeah.
So thank you very much for your time. I think you have an update on the wildlife warden scheme for us, Mr. Hawke.
But I think between myself, Councillor Elliott and Councillor Mann, yes, we probably do. I don't know if one of our councillors wants to take the update. If not, I'm happy to. Okay, I'll take it.
My excuse, Chair.
Yes, so just a brief update. I think at your request, Chair, in terms of progress in appointing a wildlife warden coordinator, which is one of the actions within the council plan. So a positive update. We went to advertise about 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, and had a really strong level of interest. Close to 20 applications, which Councillor Mann and Councillor Elliott joined the shortlisting, and I think it's a strong field of candidates. You know, can't say any more than that because we're interviewing next Tuesday, so we will have more to share with you on the back of next Tuesday. But I think it's fair to say there's been a real level of interest across West Devon, and there's been some positive news stories as a result. They've highlighted the role and what it will do. So yeah, all in all, a good news story. Well, subject to Tuesday's recruitment process.
That's great news, thank you. I did see the advert kept being published, and I thought nobody was interested, so that's very encouraging, thank you. On to item 9 on the agenda, which is task and finish group updates. Are you staying for this one? It's up to you. You're always welcome. So there's 3 things we need to do with the task and finish groups. The first one is the South West Water group. So the working group need to meet again and decide what to ask them, because then we're going to have a meeting with the working group. The working group are going to meet with South West Water. I think that's the idea, isn't it? So is everybody who's on the group already happy to stay on the group? And does anybody else want to join that group? Councillor Guthrie wants to join the group.
I'm happy enough to stay on it. I'm still interested, very interested in it.
Okay, so is it all right if we just keep with the same group and then we just organise a meeting internally? Okay, that's the first one. Then the leisure working group. So there's 2 things there. Is the parking fees at Meadowlands. We need to make some progress on that. So John Parkinson suggested we meet with Emma Widdicombe, but I think it would be good if the leisure working group could be part of that meeting. And the other thing the leisure working group needs to do is probably visit the leisure centres before the school holidays, so we keep an eye on what's going on. So I guess it's the same question. Are you happy to carry on with chairing that, Councillor Vachon?
Yes, Chair. I was going to suggest actually that we include the lead member for the car parking in whatever discussions we have, and perhaps we should actually go through the advisory group to that destination, as opposed to us setting up a separate meeting ourselves. Perhaps we take that through to the advisory group.
Okay, should we try and organise that afterwards as well?
Yes.
Yeah. Is everybody who's on the leisure group happy to stay on it? Okay. Does anybody else want to join that group? Councillor Mann?
I have difficulty because the meetings where we've been invited are usually during the weekday, and I can't get to the leisure centre, so I don't know if I should just come off so that somebody who can actually attend, because I feel that I missed a lot by not going the last time.
So that's, you work 9 to 5, do you, Monday to Friday? So if we arrange a visit on a Tuesday, would that work? Yeah.
We can fit it in with all the other member meetings, yes,
Yeah.
we can do that.
Sure, we could do that. Okay, so is there anybody else who wants to join that group? Councillor Vashon, you had a suggestion about another working group, so we've nearly got 4 now.
Yes, sorry, I'm going to prolong this meeting a little bit further. I was going to suggest if the committee would consider setting up a further task and finish group regarding the new railway station in Oakhampton. We had a presentation last week, the week before I think it was, to the town council from Network Rail. They unfortunately couldn't actually make that meeting, so Chris Brooks stood in and gave a pretty good sort of report on what he felt was happening. But obviously it's a tripartite group that's constructing this rail group. It's obviously Devon County Council, Network Rail, and God's Wonderful Railway, GWR, are being involved, as well as ourselves. But as we actually gave the money towards this project, I think we should have a little bit more sort of foresight and not control, but get tabs on what's actually going on, because it's slipping a little bit in certain aspects, especially regarding the infrastructure around the station. And I felt we needed to be on top of this, and if we can have a task and finish group to actually ask all the questions of the relevant partners, that would be very helpful to keep us informed and also let us know how our money is being spent on the project.
Is there interest from other members of the community? Sorry, Councillor Molyneux.
Councillor Molyneux,
yeah.
Promotion. So I think I wish we'd have kept Neil Hawke here now, because I think that the Oakhampton Railway will come back as part of updates to this committee in terms of the council plan, in terms of things that we're going to deliver it. So I was almost going to say can I come back and confirm before we set up a task and finish group whether that will come back automatically to overview and scrutiny anyway as part of the delivery plan updates? So what we will have going forward next year is we will have the lead members for each of the council themes to come and present what's in the delivery plan for West Devon for that year almost at every meeting. So every meeting you will have at least one lead member coming back with one council theme saying this is what we said we were going to deliver and this is where we're up to. And I think Oakhampton Railway is in one of those themes. So I'm not sure whether we need a separate task and finish group, but I can come back and confirm on email after this meeting whether that's the case or not, if that's okay, Councillor Vashon.
I think that's fine, Steve. I think some of the questions that were asked of Chris Brooks the other day, obviously he couldn't answer because it was specific to Network Rail or Devon County Council or GWR. And it would be interesting to get those representatives from each of those in to actually say what is actually happening, how they're working together. Whether that can come through our officers and through to us that way, I'd be happy for that. But it would be interesting to actually put some of the questions directly to the groups if we could. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Only to say that I attended last week a meeting of Oak Rail, which is looking at originally was looking at bringing the railway back to Oakhampton and is now looking at the Parkway station. And actually, I represent the town council on that, but Councillor Dexter is the borough council representative on that, and as such, he should be providing a report back to all members about what was discussed at that meeting.
So you're happy we do a bit of work? Mr. Molyneux goes away, does a bit of work on that and comes back to us.
And can I then, if I update everybody on the committee via email, and then you can make a decision at the next meeting, is that okay if I do it that way?
That is fine, thank you.
And thank you, Councillor Johnson. I would agree that, Councillor Dexter should be doing a update to all members what's going on anyway.
I think that's the item 9 finished. So item 10 is our annual work programme. Mr. Molyneux is going to say something about.
I think I've already said it. So what we are planning to do is once the new council is formed for the new municipal year, is we will get the chair and vice chair of the committee together with a proposed structure that we'll then send out to the new committee members well in advance of the first meeting, so that we can see what the agenda's looking like, and we'll agree that first agenda for the first meeting. Normally what we do is agree the work programme for the year in the first overview and scrutiny committee, but we've already got quite a lot of overview and task and finish groups going anyway, so there's plenty to discuss, I think, in that first meeting.
Okay, any other comments? Thank you very much for your time. I think we could close the meeting. I'd welcome any comments about the length of the meeting, whether you think it was too long or too short. So thank you very much for your contributions.